The complete Regigigas guide. Welcome, guys. My name is Rahul, and as you guys may know, I've been playing Regigigas for quite a while in this format, and it is probably one of the best decks, if not the best deck in the format, besides Lugia, in my opinion, with the best matchup spread. So today we're going to go through every single active matchup that the deck has that is, a popular-ish matchup, and even some of the fringe ones that you have a chance to beat that are bad for you or like on paper bad for you, and we're going to go through them together. If you want to know my qualifications, I top for the Oceania International Championship, and I feel like I would have won the event if not for a unfortunate double prize penalty in top four, which cost me the series. And then in top four against Andrew Hedrick, I bricked in Knoxville, Tennessee, games 2 and 3, leading to a loss. So I was so close to winning two back-to-back championships, but instead I got two top fours, which is nothing to scoff at, but I did it with this deck. One card off of this was what I played in Oceania, where I added the Cape of Toughness. This is the perfect 60, in my opinion, moving forward to tournaments. So let's talk about the logic. Reggie, LAKEY with the Electromagnetic Sonar is not only for things like control and weird matchups like that, but it is a very useful card to just recycle resources and targeted bolt things like a Dunsparce or other things on the bench if they don't have a mana fee down, just to put a lot of pressure on. And in the Lost Box matchup and other cards like that, the 130 HP really comes in clutch. You don't actually need 3 Regigigas in the Mew matchup because you're only ever really attacking with 1 or 2 Regigigas ever in the matchup. You have so many other attackers that can clean up another Mew VMAX, so you don't actually need 2 more than 2 in a matchup. It just kind of sucks if one is prized and you can't find it early and they're able to lost zone it. I think playing less than 2 of any Reggie is suicide because finding like 1 Reggie plus 1 Heavy Ball, like in theory you can find those pieces, but it's very, very difficult to do so in practice. I think 1 Boss and 2 Serena are very good for gusting cards. You can also play 3 Serena if you'd like, but I think the Boss and the niche possibility of the scenarios that it can offer are very, very powerful when you can bring up something by getting a little bit fortunate and pulling something up. The Cape of Toughness adds a lot of numbers to all of your Reggies, and I'll talk about exactly which matchups it helps in as we move forward, but some of the obvious ones are Lost Box, Regigigas Mirror, and Lugia. 4 Path to the Beak is absurdly strong. Turn 1 Path is something that most decks have a lot of trouble dealing with. Even if they have the answers, they have to kind of set up a suboptimal board to deal with it like Lugia. And then I think 1 Capture is completely fine. I know people are like, 1 Capture seems a little bit sus, but I think you cannot cut any other card to make room for the Cape. I think every other card is pretty perfect, and I would probably play the 60 again given the opportunity. There's a chance I play the same 60 again given the opportunity. So let's start with the Lugia matchup. Now, for all intents and purposes, I'm only going to be talking about the Dunsparce mana fee in Lugia compared to the builds that don't have it, because I think if they're missing either of those 2 pieces, the matchup should be very easy to deal with. If they're not playing Dunsparce, you can go for 1-shots with a LAKEY or even hit for 240. And then poke it later for 1. You can always go 2 for 2 on that. If they're playing no mana fee, you can always snipe the Dunsparce with the Battle LAKEY, and then from there the game becomes simple once again. So if they're playing both, that's what we're going to talk about. Obviously, I think Collapse is not a common tech in the deck right now, so we're not going to discuss Collapse being in the deck, but the concept of Collapse is just bump it with a Stadium, play from there. So most Lugia lists, by the way, only play a 3-2 Lugia V-Star line. This one played 3-3 in Andrew Hedrick's hands. So what is the flowchart of the matchup? Now, Lugia, if they go first, they're going to go ahead and attach to a Lugia, whatever, set up the board. You want to find path as soon as possible. Turn 1, you're going to be pathing, probably Regigating, nothing crazy unless you pop off and have a turn 1 attack. Under those circumstances, you're just trying to put as much energy into the discard as possible, so you have Auroras and Speeds as quickly as possible in your discard to attack with a LAKEY. If you can get turn 1 path down before they can V-Star, you are forcing the issue of them having a perfect board of Lugia, double Archeops, Dunsparce, Manaphy, Pumpkaboo. If they're missing even one of those pieces, you are chillin', actually. And so if they have all of those pieces, running Lugia out of energy is the crucial way to win the game. Typically, they'll play 16 energy, are the number I calculate. Always, it's 15 to 16. And I think 16 is a safe assumption to make when you're playing. I think most Lugia lists are pretty fleshed out with how they play the game, what the lists look like, no more than 2 double turbo, etc. So one of the big things you want to do as soon as they attack with Lugia V-Star is attack back into them with a Reg Ice. If you can attack back in with Reg Ice, they're going to have to retreat and hit you with something on their bench, which is super unideal for them early, because if their board is Lugia, Archeops, Dunsparce, Manaphy, Pumpkaboo, the only viable attacker in that scenario is the Archeops. And if you're taking out an Archeops as early as that, well, it's pretty bad for them. So if you can ice them, it's really good, but oftentimes you're not going to find both Aurora, you're not going to be as lucky. So you're probably going to have to swing with something and just 2-shot the first Lugia. Then they're going to go into the Archeops. Then you take out the Archeops. You trade 1 for 1. Then they go another Archeops. And in the process, if they've used more than 1 or 2 powerful energy, you can always cape to just circumvent the fact that they can kill you with an Archeops. They would need 3 powerfuls, so it forces them to find a boss. Yes, most lists are playing a lot of boss. so that exists. But you can force that prize trade that way. Path late game is also very important to trap the Radiant Zard and make it a non-factor in the end of the game, because you want to make sure they can't get a free attack off with Zard with 1 energy. But in the process, you're burning like 12 to 13 energy by doing all of this. So the remaining 3 have to either get discarded some way, some form, or they're going to have to be inefficiently used to attach, retreat, etc., which can happen. 2 things to keep in mind as you're playing the matchup that are worrisome. I'm sure that's a lot, by the way. The flowchart is very simple in my mind because I played it a lot of times. But that is kind of what you have to do. You have to run them out of energy. You have to use ice as soon as possible. Ice plus cape is a really annoying thing for them to deal with because they have to retreat the Lugia into an Archeops and have to do 180 with that, which is really tough for them to do because then they're committing 3 energies that are all powerful energies, making it so their last powerful has to be used later in the game. Small things to worry about, Raikou being something that can do 120, 120, and set up things for a Stoutland to clean up the game a little bit. Just one thing to keep in mind as you're playing. Obviously, that's a 6 energy commitment to make that play, but it is for 2 prizes. So it's the equivalent of using 3 per attack like you would for Archeops or Lugia. Luminous Sign, or not, sorry, Luminous Sign. Luminian V being able to shuffle itself back in and knock out your 120 LAKEY is also something to keep in mind because they can preserve 3 energy that way by doing that play. Probably have to retreat 1 somewhere or 2 somewhere to make that play. Yeah, that's something to keep in mind as you're doing that as well. The second Lugia that they set up is going to be a baby V, because if you ice into the V, then they can just evolve it into a V-Star and still attack into you. So you want to put more pressure onto that if possible by attacking with like a Drago or something like that, just to make it difficult for them. And if 2 V-Stars on the discard, always go with the ice in that scenario, because you don't know if they actually play a 3rd V-Star. Most lists don't. And if they haven't used a powerful yet, be aware of the Stoutland 4 powerful boss play on the Regigigas with 120 HP to take it out. So a lot of small nuance, but I think the matchup is generally favored for Regigigas, even with all these cards. So keep that in mind. This is probably going to be one of the matchups you hit most commonly. I think over the course of 5 tournaments, 4 regionals, and an IC, I've only lost 4 sets to Lugia. Yes, they've been very important situations. You can't win them all, but I've lost very few sets to Lugia. Next up is Lost Box. We're going to go through the 3 iterations of Lost Box. Ray, Azul's build with the Dragonite, and then we're going to look at the list that won in Perth with Derek. The Ray build is probably the easiest to beat because the Ray build relies on using heavy energy cost attackers like Raikou and Rayquaza. And so the first Raikou that attacks into you, you don't ever really want to put down the 120 HP Aleki in this matchup, even if they don't put a Manaphy down, because it's a bait. Unless you really have to take a knockout somewhere and you know it's going to get knocked out in the active, which is fine because then Raikou's just wasting an amazing shot anyway. But they're going to have to go 3 energy a lot of the time, so you can start counting their energies pretty frequently. And one thing you can do towards the end of the game, if you know that they're running low on energies, and they need to power up like 1 or 2 more attacks to close out the game, is that you can oftentimes just not give them the access to Raihan, and you can start bossing stuff. Like you can boss the Oranguru back up because they really need the Oranguru in play, or you can boss a Rayquaza up or a Raikou up and stick it in the active, forcing them to not have Raihan access, and just make them play a little bit weird. This deck just burns resources on its own, so it's actually one of the freest matchups if you can just keep attacks up, because they need to put so much effort. Like their first attack's going to have to be like Cram, and then you can just net that. And then their second attack's going to have to be like Raikou or Rayquaza. If they use Rayquaza, now they've got a guy stuck in the active that needs 3 energy to work the next turn. So if they don't have a Manaphy down, you can snipe the bench. If they do, even if they do have a Manaphy down, you can just chill for a turn. You don't need to respond with the attack immediately. But it's just one of those where it's like they're going to burn their own resources much quicker than you can do anything. The Azul version is a little bit trickier because they have the Dragonite and the Snorlax to start taking put pressure on you pretty quickly. If they can go to the turn 2 Snorlax or turn 2 Dragonite, they're immediately putting pressure on you to respond with an attack, because if you don't, they can start going 1 for 1 pretty efficiently. But what you can do is just to hit the Dragonite with an Ice if you have that, or just rock the Lax. And once that happens, then they have to respond. And that's 1 gate down, 1 attacker down. So they're using a Rod to put those back and get the attacker back into play. That's another gate and another switching out. And all of that, and they have to have all those pieces in hand to once again come back in with that attacker. So let's go, say they take 2 for 2 again with the Dragonite. It's probably going to be Dragonite that's their ideal attacker. Now we're at 4 to 4. Ideally, once the Dragonite goes down. And you're marning them the whole time, keep in mind, and you're pathing them. So they're not finding their pieces like effectively through Radiant Greninja. And their board is going to be kind of icky, so you can kind of force them to whiff at some point. You kind of have like a +2 turn advantage to start the game if you go first. If you go second, you have a +1 turn advantage at all times. And if you get the first attack off, then you have a +2 again. So it's like a +3 effectively turn advantage on how much time you have. So Lost Box in general you have so much time, because when they cram you or Sableye you, they're never taking a full knockout. Or even if they Greninja you to put 90-90 somewhere, just 1 net later, their attack is moot. Now, if the version plays Raikou over Zero Aura, they can always rope and try to take a knockout early with Raikou and just be like, hey, if you attack with Rock, I lose the game, but I'm going to force you into a position where I don't need to have 2 energy, like a gate, like an important gate plus attachment to make this play, and I can get to 7 much earlier. However, these lists are not turbo by any means, so getting to 7 by turn 2 is a little bit unlikely. Requires a lot of nets, requires a lot of switching cards. So those are just things to keep in mind. I think this is probably the trickiest version to navigate, but I think it's still completely fine, like probably a 65-35 in Reggie's favor. And then we have the last version, which is the Raikou Zamazunta build. This is a newer build played by Yuichi in seniors and OCSC finals, as well as Derek winning the Perth regionals. Zamazunta is a little bit annoying because Retaliate does 220, but you can employ the same strategy we talked about earlier in the Ray matchup, where it's a very heavy resource attacker. Obviously, again, in both matches, be cognizant of the Goon as well. It's like the double knockout with Goon plus Raikou. Just be cognizant of that. There's sometimes something you can't do about it, but you have to just like be aware of it happening. Zam only does 100, so you can always like just chill if they set up a Zam. You don't have to knock it out immediately. Drago knocks it out perfectly, which is really nice. But if you don't want to do that immediately, you can just chill and like not activate Raihan. Take a turn to put back cards in your hand like a net with the Battle Lecky. Plenty of time to just like recycle resources, force them, because every flower selecting they do, that's a card gone. Every turn that, like every chorus they do, that's 2 cards gone. So you are forcing them to burn resources very, very quickly. And late game, they will oftentimes have everything they need in their hand, but they can't close out a game because you just force them out of resources pretty quickly. And this doesn't have water energy, so you're not worried about that either. So this one's probably a very easy version to beat against too. I think Lost Box is one of Reggie's favorite matchups, and it is usually the second most popular deck in the field. Third up is Mew VMAX. I think Mew is a little bit tricky, actually. People consider this one free, but I think there's a lot of nuance to it because Judge is really hard to deal with sometimes in the early game because a Judge plus knockout with Lost City puts you in a really tricky spot because now you have to find that other Reggie, find a net to bring it back to your hand, and if you don't have a gift energy, you're not really drawing as many cards as you'd like. The problem with Mew is that they're going to just bonk probably a Drago, or they're going to try to go for a Gigas, and then you have to put the other one down, accelerate your energies, and net back up the guy you put down, because if you don't, you're in a situation where they can boss the other one up, take it out, and now all of a sudden you don't have attackers left. But one thing to keep in mind is the game does not end immediately, because Mew does have to take 6 prizes. Let me repeat, Mew has to take 6 prizes, and Mew does not play that many switching cards, so you will probably take out a Mew VMAX somewhere in the equation. You can power Registeel is a really good attacker, LAKEY is a very good attacker, Rock and Ice really not so much. But the Drago and Gigas being your best. So all of these can be powered up some way through the game. You should be attaching an energy per turn unless you don't have the 3 in the discard. Like an energy should be on your board somewhere to power up another attacker, because it's pretty commonplace to assume that you're lost, like guys are going to start getting Lost Citied. So you can attach like an extra Aurora to a Steel, or you can attach a Speed to an LAKEY just to power them up rather than discarding them, because your 3 energy attachment will be a relevant attack later in the game, given the fact that your paths will stick at some point, and they will not be able to find switching cards considering they only play 3. So at some point in the game, maybe when they've taken 4, maybe when they've taken 5 prizes, they will have to like retreat a damaged Mew VMAX, or just retreat the Mew VMAX and be like, pass, please don't kill me, or win the game here, and you then have the authority. And that happens a lot sooner than you think a lot of the time, because they're not playing cross switchers anymore in their list, or a lot of them are not, so it comes down to that. Now, the Fusion version is a little bit trickier, because the Fusion version, they can go into single prizes like Meloetta and Lost City you immediately. However, they play more clunky cards, so Path sticks them much easier. So they're going to go into Meloetta, take a guy out. You're going to go ahead and take out the Meloetta with anything, it's fine. And then they go into a Mew or another Meloetta, and then the game begins from there. But you have to, again, it's a Lost City conundrum. You're just not taking 3-3 as a path. You have to go 1-3-2 or like 1-3-3, something like that. Just because it's a little bit trickier and annoying. Now, Arc Duraludon was the 4th most played matchup, or deck in the field. Arc Duraludon is kind of simple. If they're a smart player, they will power up their baby Duraludons and not evolve them until you hit into it, because then you don't have the one-shot potential on a Duraludon VMAX. Their Lost City count is very important, because they're going to try to Lost City 2 of your guys and make it so you can't play the game. However, your early path, you can still start the stadium race, I think, with 4 path, because you can stop them from Starbirthing early, because their deck revolves heavily on Starbirthing. And if they bump that stadium to Starbirth, you probably have a miscellaneous Reggie in the active when you're Regigating. So if you lose like an Ice or something, you don't really care. Like, I don't really care if I lose an Ice or a Steel. Rock is very important, Gigas is very important, and Drago is very important. Those 3 are very important in this matchup. You have one-shots across the board. If you hit with an LAKEY, Put 40-40 on the two bad Duras early. You have the potential to one-shot them with a Drago Choice Belt, a Rock. No, just Drago Choice Belt, Gigas Choice Belt. Like, you have a lot of options to one-shot them later down the line. So that could be a play as well into the RCS if that's what you think. If they power up two Duras with two RCS attacks, it's a little bit scary because that's how they kind of play the game. Yeah, so it's a little bit scary if they do that. But I think the matchup is overall very straightforward. You just swing at each other if you guys want to watch a better flowchart of what happens. Even if you fall behind, the Grant Shen matchup in top 8 of Knoxville is a good way to look at it. And then next up, we have Vikavolt. I guess Mirror. Mirror is just whoever attacks first wins the game, usually. Or first knockout wins the game, usually. If one person plays Cape and the other doesn't, it's like an 80-20 because Cape can mitigate one of the knockouts. But if both players pay Cape, it's just first attack. It's super silly, but that's pretty much what it is. Rock, Drago, and Gigas are the most important attackers because all of them one-shot the other Regis. You just go in a cycle. Next up, we have Vikavolt. Vikavolt's becoming a lot more popular across the board. Vikavolt is going to want to item lock you. If you're a Vikavolt player, you want to go second. If you're a Regis player, you want to go second in this matchup. I think it's correct to optimally choose second, so you have a chance to use a supporter, and they don't get to pop off. Yes, you have the chance to open a path and stick them, but I think it's like a 40% chance to do that in your opening hand without any additional draw. So you want to go second, try to use a supporter as soon as possible, set up your board as soon as possible. Just put a Regigator in the active and start Regigating. Their damage is so pitiful that you just want to get energy into the discard so you can start moving guys around. And you can also just manually attach 3 times to Rock, by the way, and they're like, well, what do we do? Matchup is pretty simple, in my opinion. I think you just manually attach 3 times to Rock, start swinging. Ice is pretty good, too, because they got to retreat these big fatties. And they have 3 switching cards, effectively, plus, like, the switchers, and they don't really want to use those. So matchup is pretty straightforward. Rock is good. Ice is good. Everyone else is whatever in the matchup. Battle Lecky can bring you back nets and save you time. Not even nets. Like, you can put back cards in your hand with Battle Lecky early. So if you have the option to get an Lecky on the board, I would just grab the Battle Lecky if that's an option. And just put it in a position where I can bring back Marnies into my hand or bring back Researchers into my hand. Just guarantee I have a follow-up supporter in my hand to just continue playing the game. Next up, we have Goodra. Probably the worst matchup for Regis, in my opinion. Goodras is really hard to deal with because they have Rolling Iron and then you're doing like no damage. But they don't play Manaphy. They play Sinnoh. So what you can do if a Goodra hits the board is use Battle Lecky to snipe 120 and just put yourself in a position where you can try to two-shot it or force them to use their Moisture Star pretty early. But you don't want to start the path race because of the 3 Sinnoh. Some play 4. Their deck is a little bit bad, so Marnie's really good early game to just start breaking them. But if they start setting up perfectly and they get an attack, like a turn 2 or let's say turn 3 Goodra attack with another Goodra on bench, you probably lost the game. But you have Rope Boss or Rope Serena to kind of bring up a Goodra and kill. So you have to kind of bank on that happening. A lot of lists are not playing Parasol, so towards the end of the game, if it feels like they've kind of exhausted their switching cards, account for 3 switch, 3 rope, I think is like probably correct, and like these kinds of things. You can start just poking them with ice and forcing them to either retreat or find a switching option. And if they miss it, like if you can ice like for 1 turn and that 20 damage sticks, then the ice again, 100 damage sticks, and then another attack and you win the game. It's a lot of work, yes, but you have to do it that way, I think, at the end of the game if you're Hail Marrying. I managed to take 2 Goodras to ties in 2 events doing stuff like this. It's not a completely lost matchup, but it's a really, really bad matchup if they set up perfectly. So it's kind of scary. Next up is Palkia. Palkia is a little bit of a dead deck, but I did lose this on my win-in, so I felt like it's worth to talk about. Palkia with Ice Cube, really hard because they just go to lone Ice Cube and win the game. If they get Ice Cube up with quick shootings on the board, you can rope the quick shootings or boss the quick shootings and take knockouts where you want, and you can Battle Lecky back the rope and keep doing that over and over and over again. And once you reach a stalemate scenario where Ice Cube, there's a lone Ice Cube, and you want to go ahead and go with the Battle Lecky, Cape, put them down at the same time. First one, pick up, I don't know, a Marnie or a Rod or something so you can keep cycling, and then they're going to hit, you're going to get another card back, probably a net, they're going to hit, you're going to go ahead and net this guy back up, put it back down, put it in the active, get the cape it, net, cape, net, keep going. And so you cycle infinitely, and then you probably go to a 0-0 tie. Be aware of Crab milling 2 cards. That's how I lost game 1. But you can Marnie, you can take your time. It's basically an infinite loop in a lot of scenarios because Palkia can't really do anything. Early game, they're very susceptible to Marnie and Path. But they do play Lost City, so keep in mind that they might Thornton Lost City and just pop your Battle Lecky. But if you put a lot of pressure early, you probably take like 3 or 4 prizes before they can even get to a lone Ice Cube board state because they need to use the Inteleon and Palkia line to set up their board, and then they have to net up their whole board. So it's not like super easy for them to do it in a lot of scenarios. So they might try to race you too. Last but not least is Control. Control is a really bad matchup but control also is very susceptible to Marnie. You don't have to Marnie immediately a lot of the time because you can let them build their hand, like you can let them work towards like a combo, and you can Marnie the turn that you're knocking out a Snorlax and disrupting the combo in their hand. If they're the flying Pika build, you just save the rope and don't knock out stuff at a certain point. If they use like 1 or 2 nets, you just stop knocking out stuff, and electromagnetic sonar back your net, your boss card, and then a Marnie at some point, and then like Marnie plus Gust or whatever, because they need to go into the combo, but they need to wait for you to knock stuff out. And if you're not knocking stuff out, they can't remove things off their board pretty easily. So it becomes a weird like stalemate scenario where they can't like Thornton up their entire board and do that. So you take your free time to do that, and then eventually just take the one knockout you need, and you can pretty much 1-0 them a lot of the time. Yeah, that's how control works. If they're playing Ice Cube, same thing with the Infinite Loop. We just do the exact same thing we did before, just go into the Infinite Loop with Ice Cube. And that's how you kind of win that game. If they Sydney and hit your like cape or something early, you're like, that sucks. But I think the Infinite Loop is kind of what you want to do. Besides that, I think I covered everything. I think that's every single matchup that is relevant in the current metagame. If I missed something, let me know in the comments below. I'll try to answer it to my best of my ability with the Regigigas matchup. Hopefully this helps you guys because I kind of understand the deck inside and out. I've played 5 major events with it, and I've placed no worse than top 32. I'm earning about 10 wins at every single event I've played at, which is kind of crazy with this deck. It's really an amazing deck. But please let me know in the comments below if there's any questions you have. I'm going to try to answer them as best as I can. And if it doesn't bother you guys too much, please like and subscribe. That really helps out the channel. Leave a nice comment, maybe just like Regigigas or something. I don't know. Something cheeky. But thank you guys for supporting me as always. It's really awesome. And I'll see you guys next time.